Welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the Marine branch of Monterey County Free Libraries. My name is Scott, and I'm the librarian here. I want to thank the Friends of Marina Library for hosting tonight's event. And I'd also like to thank the Japanese American Citizens League Monterey chapter for presenting tonight's program. Thank you. And at this point, I'd just like to introduce our evening speakers. So we have JACL National President Larry Oda, Historian Tim Thomas, and Monterey Peninsula Unified School District Board Member Jeff Uchida. So after the film, the panel will discuss the film and the history it portrays, and then there'll be time for question and answer period. Before we actually begin to screen the film, I'd like to ask Tim Thomas to come up and just set the stage for the film and share a little bit about what makes this story so important.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming today. So I'm sure you'll ask, why am I the guy here? I actually, for many years, was the historian curator for the Monterey Maritime Museum. In the last 40 some odd years, I've been researching the history of the fisheries of Monterey, and that's what took me to JACL, chasing the Japanese story, which is one I always thought was undertold, and when it was told, it usually wasn't correct. And it was really the abalone story that really brought me to JACL, and I never left. I've been there for 20 years. And at the same time, they were trying to create a small museum at down at the hall. And by the way, I need to ask, anybody here been in the JACL hall? Who's been there? Raise your hand. Oh, very good. So you all know that this is our 100th anniversary of that building, just 3 weeks ago. So that was it. So they got me involved in helping put together a small museum we have downstairs. And we have brochures. Please take one of our little museum. I should know that we don't have any set hours for that museum, but we do open up a special event and for school groups. But if you just call and ask, we will open it up for you so you can bring your family and come see it. So while I was setting up that museum, I was upstairs in the office going through some files, and about a week before that, we found this old film, 16mm 1938 film, of the Japanese community in Monterey. And so I was looking to see what else we could find, and I came across this sort of rounded envelope, and I could see it was open one end, and I see these pieces of blue paper sticking out. And my first thought was, oh, these must be blueprints of the building. How great would that be for the museum? And I took them out of the drawer, opened them up, and no, they were these petitions. Now I knew about the petition story. I've been, as I said, researching the Japanese story for 20 years. And other friends of mine, other historians who chased that same story, we knew about them, but we didn't think they still existed. And so, and what the story, you'll see it in the film, but just basically when it was announced that the Japanese were returning home from those internment, those concentration camps in 1945, there was an organization suing us that tried to stop this from happening. And they put an ad in the Monterey paper, Monterey Herald, appeared in April 1945, trying to gain support to stop the Japanese returning to the West Coast, which incensed a woman named Toni Jackson. Toni Jackson, you'll learn about Toni in the film here, but she created this petition drive that went around the Monterey Peninsula to gain support to welcome her friends and her Japanese friends and neighbors home to the Monterey Peninsula. He gave up close to 600 signatures in a very short period of time. And Monterey is the only place on the West Coast where this happened, only in Monterey. Monterey is a very unique community in a lot of different ways. All those who live in this area, you know, Monterey is a small town. It was then, it still is today. And I know I'm taking too much time, but just quickly, for me as a fisheries historian, what I've learned is that everybody grew up together, they went to schools together. Where the JACL Hall is, there once was a thriving Japan town there. Right across the fence would be some Portuguese fishermen, Italian fishermen, and oftentimes at holiday times they would exchange foods across the fence line. They all went to school together. And what I found is that in Monterey, as you know, Monterey was the sardine capital of the world. Right? It was, and it was abalone about the Japanese to Monterey. So we had sardines, abalone, but there was a big fishery here. But Monterey is the only place I have found where the fishermen have one union. So Southern California, Northern California, all the ethnic groups have their own separate unions. Monterey has one, and I think that's primarily because Monterey is a small town. These guys grew up together, they all went to school together, they all played together, but the real key, I found those boys all played baseball together in that ballpark right across the street from the JACL Hall. So this film was part of that connection of how Monterey is a small town. And they welcomed the Japanese back home. So a lot of Japanese did return back to the Monterey Peninsula. So I think that's enough of me, and I will turn it back over to you guys to enjoy the film. So thank you.
August of 2013. A young woman, a high school kid, we brought in to help upstairs to clean up some of the drawers upstairs that are kind of a mess, and she was doing some cleaning things up. And she actually ran across an old 16mm film in the drawer there. A film that was shot about 1938 that shows the Japanese community here in Monterey playing baseball down the wharf, having fun. And so, gee, we'd never seen this film before. So I began to look through the drawers, and I see this sort of rolled up envelope. So I pull them out of the envelope, probably the first time since 1945, and I unrolled them, and I saw what they were, and oh, holy mackerel.
What is the legality of rounding people up without trial, without evidence, and without any due process of any kind? They are incarcerated merely because he looked like the enemy. They lost their property, they lost their businesses, some had lost their lives. And even after the war, after the people returned from the war, they were subjected to vandalism, attacks, threats, this sort of thing. That was pretty commonplace. The Monterey Petition is a textbook example of people standing up for what the country should be about. For these people in Monterey to take a contrary stand and see the humanity behind it, that's pretty exceptional. I think it's a lesson for all time.
Monterey was originally a Spanish town, Spanish capital of California.
I mean, they were speaking Spanish here until the 1890s. This was not your typical New England replica California town. This was a different place.
Very large Sicilian, Italian population. And we often forget about the important Japanese-American contribution to the fishing community here.
Sicilians and Japanese fishermen dominated the economy here.
Japanese came here because of fishing. So the Japanese came here for abalone, and they also came here for salmon.
And they've been completely sort of written out of that history. It's all focused on the Italians and Sicilians.
In the 1909 salmon season, there were 185 salmon boats working the Monterey Bay. 145 of them were Japanese-owned.
The Monterey Peninsula was such a multicultural, a wonderful mix of people, and Many of the racist things that grew other places didn't take root here.
But the Japanese who came to Monterey, one of the things they did was they westernized themselves immediately and got involved within the communities themselves. Monterey is the only place where the fishermen here had one union. Whereas in Southern California, Northern California, all the ethnic groups had separate unions. Monterey had one. Monterey is a small town. These guys all grew up together and they all went to school together, they all played together. But the real key, at least for me, the real key was baseball. They all played baseball together. And it was not uncommon for these young Japanese boys to learn to speak Italian before they learned to speak English, and those Italian boys that learned to speak Japanese before they learned to speak English. And if you look at any photograph from any Japanese event that's going on, the first thing you'll see in every photograph is the American flag. They always have that flag out there.
Japanese owned farms all in the Carmel Valley and around the Monterey Peninsula.
The Miyamoto family that farmed around Carmel Mission and lower Carmel Valley before the war, they had strawberry farms, and they would invite the local kids to come down and pick strawberries at 5 cents a basket. And of course, we would steal a few as we were going along. And I don't think I've ever tasted a strawberry as good as those. No, I don't think the Miyamotos did farm down there anymore afterwards.
After the war, they lost the land, they lost the business, they lost all that.
And I asked Maya Miyamoto why he has never been resentful, and he said, "That's in the past. We've got to get over it."
There's a Japanese saying, shigata ga nai, which kind of means unpleasantness is not to be noticed.
It can't be helped. You just have to suck it up and deal with it.
Many Issei Nisei parents did not talk about camp life or the evacuation from their homes.
They didn't talk about it, they sucked it up and marched on.
But over time, as it became more acceptable within the Japanese community to begin to talk about it, they did.
I count myself as one of the lucky people who grew up during the time when Martin Luther King was alive. Of course, during the struggle for black civil rights, we as Japanese Americans, as Asian Americans, wondered about our own past.
The Japanese had no navy to speak of at all in 1850. And Admiral Perry came and said, "Welcome to the world," in 1853. Japan immediately begins to ramp up. Their technology explodes. They're so good at stuff, but we brought them a model train and they were making railroads in 5 years.
There had been misunderstandings, disagreements between Japan and the United States going back to 1900.
In 1905, the Japanese Navy, they took on the Russians. The Russian fleet came all the way around, came up along the coast, and in the Straits of Tsushima, the Japanese Navy sank them, destroyed them. That is such a seminal event in the history of the world. At that moment, brown people, particularly people who were colonials, all sat up and said, "Say what?" It became the inspiration for revolutionary movements everywhere in Asia. Japan was becoming a formidable country.
There grew increasing concern about the role of Japan and trade with the U.S.
Pearl Harbor doesn't come out of nowhere. Pearl Harbor comes out of the fact that the growing power had a natural resource deficit. They didn't have iron ore, they didn't have oil. Meanwhile, in 1905, the Asiatic Exclusion League was founded in San Francisco, which sort of picked up the anti-Chinese stuff, warmed it up, and became the basis of the anti-Japanese movement in California.
In 1924, U.S. Congress passes legislation which severely limits further Japanese immigration to the U.S.
The Congress shuts off Japanese immigration altogether. Huge uproar in Japan. They lost face. Actually, on June 1st, 1924, in Tokyo, they had a national humiliation day. Humiliation over the fact that America had snubbed them.
Or more accurately, the elite diplomatic community.
So you can see this thing is building, and the only thing between Japan and California is water. By the 30s, internationally, everybody knew there was going to be a war between the United States and Japan. I mean, this is not a secret, and it's making everybody very nervous. War with Japan was not a surprise. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. That was a shock. That knocked everybody off their balance.
We interrupt this broadcast and bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
The way we spent an evening was around the radio, listening to the news. I mean, that's the entertainment we had, was the radio. Everyone, of course, was crying. We were all scared, too. We were terrified.
Pearl Harbor.
There was no warning. Oh, I was shocked when that happened. I couldn't believe that Japanese soldiers would attack Pearl Harbor, being that there were so many Japanese already there. Some of the kids in my class, they had brothers that were killed in Hawaii, and that really shook me up. And here I'm Japanese, so.
We, Americans, tend to look at Pearl Harbor and then, for some reason, don't know what happened between Pearl Harbor and, say, the summer. The night of December 7th, that Sunday evening, I call it the night of the kitchen tables. It's the night when everybody, not just Japanese, but everybody was sitting around a kitchen table going, what's going to happen to us? What are we going to do? How do we respond to this? And by doing that, they turned in. They turned in and started to worry, as we all naturally do, about themselves. And as they are all turned in, a community disappears behind them.
After Pearl Harbor, the anti-Japanese sentiment really intensifies.
General John L. DeWitt, for example, said that the Japanese race is an enemy race. The very fact that no sabotage has occurred to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken, quote unquote. What kind of conspiracy theory is that? General John L. DeWitt was a QAnon of his day.
But critical to this whole story was the absolute palpable fear that was here on the coast. Part of the plan Japanese had in place, Admiral Yamamoto, to move the submarines onto the American coast. There are 9 what are called I-boats stationed from Seattle to San Diego. They're just off the coast, maybe 50 to 100 miles. On each submarine, they had a collection of bamboo poles. They're probably 10 feet long, painted black, with a big stone on one end and a piece of glass on the other. Periodically, they would throw one of those overboard, which would then sit up in the water. People would stand on the beach and go, look, there's a Japanese submarine. People were terrified. And it starts for the Monterey Peninsula on the 20th of December. And submarine I-23 surfaces off of the Cypress Point golf course in full view of golfers. So they come up and they chase a tanker, across the surface using their deck gun, and they don't hit it. But in full view of God and everybody, right, there's a Japanese submarine, 363 feet long. These are big puppies, firing this 5.5-inch cannon, which makes an enormous noise, pow, boom, and chasing a tanker right across Monterey Bay, right in front of everybody. Newspapers play it up because censorship came immediately after Pearl Harbor. Local newspapers, national newspapers, their news is being controlled by the military. Well, they couldn't not know this. Pow, boom.
I can remember them talking about the submarines down the coast, right where Mom and Dad had lived when they were younger. When your parents are afraid, you're afraid too.
They really did think they were going to be invaded. And so fear does do horrible things.
Enemy planes and scare headlines on December 8th are purely imaginary. But on February 23rd, 1942, a submarine does shell a refinery near Santa Barbara. The highest military authorities are certain the enemy does not plan an invasion, but behind the defenses, fear is screaming hate. Columnist Westbrook Pegler wants all Japanese under guard, and to hell with habeas corpus. Columnist Henry McLemore writes, I hate Japanese, all of them.
And what you find is, at times of economic depression, economic challenge, or war, that this xenophobia springs up in California history.
Americans are remembering with vengeance in their heart.
When conspiracy theories and alternative facts hold sway over the real ones, then a society can descend into a very dark place where neither facts matter, the law doesn't matter, nor the Constitution. And at that point, not only do people suffer, in this case Japanese Americans, but democracy itself is imperiled.
The restrictions start actually in January, and they begin to tighten. They tighten their bank accounts, they collect all the radios, but they did that actually for the Italians and the Germans too.
A lot of prejudice in those days. Italians got a lot of prejudice. Germans, there was a lot of prejudice. Japanese, the worst probably. It was hysteria.
But especially in time of war, there's no ceiling to human hate.
The FBI had been targeting these people long before the war started. They were looking for leaders in the Japanese community, the Italian community, and the German community.
15 individuals, men all, were in fact arrested in the morning hours and taken away by the FBI. This happened in several local communities up and down the West Coast.
Well, I was at school, and I came home, and my mother and my older sister were standing at the door waiting for me. And said, what happened? Said, oh, they took Dad away. And then it came out in the paper. There were about 12 or 15 of the Japanese community leaders that were taken to a place in San Francisco, Shark Park.
I spent 30 years talking to people who were here during this period, during that period from December 7th to about the 1st of May. And what I was curious about was, where the hell were you? Where were you when this thing started to round up the very people that you knew, the people that you were your neighbors? Why didn't you say something?
You were disappointed, you know? You're born and raised here, and then all of a sudden they drag your father.
The first Japanese American arrested was a friend of mine named Tommy Katatani. They came at him with full force. They threatened his loved ones. They threatened the community. And I think that's an important reason why people accepted this. It's a lot more complex if you think they should have rebelled early on.
Executive Order 9066 was issued on February 19, 1942 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. What it did was establish the Western Defense Command, which was authorized to create military zones of exclusion leading up to the forced removal of 120,000 Japanese on the West Coast.
Tuesday, April 28, 1942.
Instructions to all persons of Japanese.
All persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien.
Both alien and non-alien be evacuated from the above area by 12 o'clock noon.
President Roosevelt decided that the best thing to do would be to gather all the Japanese along the coast and take them away so that they would not be giving information. This was our view of what was happening.
You know, people sitting in grammar school, you know, half the class was gone the next day.
What is the legality of rounding people up on the naked accusation of the military alone that you're dangerous, without trial, without evidence, without any due process of any kind?
This is something the government said they wanted to do and they had to do, and that was the word they used, was internment. It was a gentler word.
They invented a whole language to justify that process, whether it was evacuation or relocation or internment. Yeah, I think we're struggling to find a description of what America did to its own people. There's words that have been used to soften it to such a point that it becomes meaningless. It's not an evacuation, it's not a relocation. It is the removal of persons' civil liberties. I think incarceration is a more accurate way of portraying what happened.
The public really had no choice. You can't stop the U.S. government doing things like that. They'll shoot you.
This just didn't happen in the United States. In Canada, they made a move against Japanese and Italians. They did it in Mexico.
They were being taken away, leaving all of their possessions behind. It was very scary for us to think that we could do that to them.
How could right-minded people allow this to happen? I mean, the government's basically stupid. We know that.
Fortunately, we now know, because of Freedom of Information Act, that it was a great deal more sinister than that. There was no reason to do this roundup. That the incarceration result of very highly educated people intentionally suppressing facts, evidence, intelligence reports in order to achieve a political end that would benefit them, even if it meant lying to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a very different story than saying that the Japanese-American incarceration was the result of stupidity.
And we were given approximately, if I recall, 5 or 6 days to pack up, sell Dad's business, and be ready to report to one of 16, 17 so-called assembly centers, which were really detention centers.
You know, my father, he received his diploma from Berkeley mailed to him while he was being held in a horse stall. My father's family, and my mother's family too, almost 8,000 Japanese Americans were put in Tanforan Assembly Center. That was a horse track converted into a temporary detention camp. Men, women, and children were put in horse stalls, which is the naked light bulb, no heat, no hot water.
It was kind of scary thinking where would we go? All the Japanese-American Japanese of ancestry were herded up and put into camps. And one of the camps was in Poston, Arizona, in the middle of the Arizona desert. There were thousands of us there.
A typical barrack was 20 feet wide and 120 feet long. By being a family of 6, we got a room that was 24 by 20.
They all suffered, you know. Some of them were beaten pretty badly by the guards, you know. They just, of course, they had kids that died at Pearl Harbor or something like that.
There's a few instances of people who walked too close to the wire and were shot dead.
And I spent my sophomore, junior, and senior year there.
Well, we wrote letters every day to Washington, please release my dad. And so they finally did let us join them in Crystal City. And it was a family camp. There were maybe about 3,000 of us families, fathers and mothers and kids.
At the beginning of 1943, people began to get drafted out of those camps to serve in the U.S. Army. My father was drafted.
The Americanism of the great majority of America's Japanese finds its highest expression in the thousands who are in the United States Army. Almost half of them are in a Japanese-American combat team. Some of the volunteers came from Hawaii. Hundreds of them volunteered while they were in relocation centers.
Volunteers out of camp, about 1,200 out of the camps, young men. That formed the 442nd, which went on to fight heroically in the European theater, in Italy, all the way up to Germany, which incidentally turned out to be the most decorated military unit in all of American military history.
And my husband was in the 442nd. Yes, he was the first sergeant of service company. He didn't talk about it very much. No. He was in Europe, fighting in France and Italy. His parents are in camp like that, you know. And that's where we stayed for 3 years during the war.
Is there anything left of the old Japantown? A few homes, residential homes, and the JACL Hall.
So we knew there had been this petition drive in May of 1945, but we never knew this petition still existed. We didn't even think about it. We just assumed they were long gone. August of 2013. A young woman, a high school kid, we brought in to help upstairs to clean up some of the drawers upstairs. And she actually ran across an old 16mm film in the drawer there. A film that was shot about 1938 that shows the Japanese community here in Monterey playing baseball down the wharf, having fun. So I began to look through the drawers, and I could see some blue things hanging out of it. And I thought initially it looked like blueprints. So I pulled them out of an envelope, probably the first time since 1945, and I unrolled them, and I saw what they were. And oh, holy mackerel. I realized how important they were, and how they tied all the story together.
And I first heard about it from Tim. He sent me an email and said, "You never guessed what I found."
When I was first shown these petitions, I remember shaking. I thought they were so beautiful and such a wonderful expression of empathy and camaraderie for the Japanese American community. The petition in Monterey was a direct response to an advertisement taken by a group in Salinas that they placed in the Monterey Herald that attacked Japanese Americans from coming back to the region.
And it was essentially an organization to stop the Japanese from coming back to the West Coast.
There was just one name attached to it, and it was the Monterey Bay Council on Japanese Relations. We tracked down who that was, and it led back to this one particular individual in Salinas.
Edward Seifert, who I believe was a lawyer and worked for an organization called the Salinas Valley Growers Shippers Association.
He was very powerful. He was very well funded, and he had control of the growers community throughout the valley. Seifert's anti-Japanese activities stretch back to the 1930s. The Japanese were targeted here almost as soon as they arrived. They threatened the power structure of California agriculture.
A lot of the anti-Japanese stuff is economic. It's competition.
I think that there was an advantage to some of the farmers in the Salinas Valley, especially, of not wanting the Japanese to come back.
They were very hard workers and very successful. In other words, they were rising competitors. And when you get too close to taking away my business and job, I'm going to find a way to push you back.
But you also, there's the element of race there.
They go hand in hand, and I use this metaphor because one doesn't exist without the other.
In 1942, a representative of the Salinas Valley Growers Association was interviewed in the Saturday Evening Post. He finally just says it. We don't want to compete with them. We don't want them to come back. He just says it flat out. We don't want them to come back. You want this coast for white people or brown people? All the standard racist stuff that had been going on since 1905.
The ad that appeared in the Herald was unsigned. And from my point of view, that's about as gutless as it gets. The anonymity of it sort of reeked of what was going on over in Germany. People in the community of Monterey were shocked, and they took that initial shock and took it into action.
If you go through the Herald, the ad comes out first, and then the next day, the rebuttal letters start, these individual letters. Karis Wilson Weston, Tony Ricketts is in there. And then there's Mrs. Sumida's wonderful letter that comes out of camp.
I am an American citizen of Japanese ancestry and formerly a resident of Monterey. At present, I am in a relocation camp in Poston, Arizona, where at one time over 20,000 Japanese made their homes. Last week when I received my issue of the Herald, I was quite hurt to read the large ad in the paper, quote, "to discourage the return of the Japanese to the West Coast," unquote. My husband is fighting in Italy now, along with hundreds of other Nisei soldiers, fighting for what he believes is right, the American way of life. Someday when the war is over, we hope to return to Monterey with our little son. I want to thank the people of Monterey who wrote to the Herald to defend us. I know as long as there are people like that left in this country, all the Nisei boys did not die in vain, and what they fought for will live on. Respectfully yours, Mrs. Yukio Sumida.
And so this group of sort of forward-thinking citizens said, no, these are American citizens. They were born here. They have as much right to be here as we do.
Okay, specifically Tony Ricketts, Edward Ricketts, and I saw Steinbeck in here someplace.
John Steinbeck signed this? I go to Salinas High School, and John Steinbeck went to school there. Yep, so of course I know who he is. I've read the Red Pony, I think, Grapes of Wrath, good stuff. Heck yeah, Steinbeck, you rule.
Literature that he wrote, the predicament of ordinary people, caught under circumstances not of their control, victimized. In that sense, it doesn't surprise me, but this is quite a historical document.
And if you think about Steinbeck's work, he identifies with those communities in Monterey in ways that he doesn't in Salinas.
Which made people in Salinas furious. People did not like him in Salinas at that time.
The canning season was very, very lively, very noisy, and stinked. A very bad smell. I'm Ed Ricketts, Jr. My father was Ed Ricketts, Sr., and he lived at what they call the lab on Canterbury Road.
Ed was, of course, a well-known, famous marine biologist, made famous really by John Steinbeck in the books Cannery and Sweet Thursday.
There were 3 houses of prostitution on Cannery Road. The lab was right smack across the street from the biggest one. My dad had an awful lot of friends. They were older than I, but younger than he.
I know they had this whole kind of artist colony, Henry Miller and Steinbeck and all these people. I just imagine their lives. It must have been fascinating lives. I did know that Doc was characterized after Ed Ricketts.
Everything is based a little bit on a truth, but John was able to exaggerate an awful lot of things. Physically, they were opposites. John was a big monster. Dad was a little short guy.
And God bless Ed Ricketts. Ed Ricketts wrote a letter to the Monterey Herald in which he compared this movement in Salinas to what was going on in Germany, and he referred to it specifically as a form of Hitlerism and fascism.
So Toni Ricketts and Toni Jackson are actually the same person. Toni Jackson was the girlfriend of Ed Ricketts at that time, but if you look at the petition, she actually signs it as Toni Ricketts.
Toni was concerned about the treatment of the Japanese in World War II. Toni didn't like it, and so she was giving speeches in favor of the Japanese people. She was the one, I guess, who started all this.
It's just the kind of thing that I could imagine my mom saying, well, why? Well, let's get a petition going and let's knock on doors and let's let people know. Because in her faith of humanity and the fundamental good, she would assume that if people really understood what was going on, they would see the light and they would join the movement.
These families have made their homes here for many years and have been part of the life of our community.
I know that this is the typewriter that was used by Dad with a small print, Elite, not Pica. It was typed and composed by Toni.
She was the fastest typist in Ed Ricketts' lab. She was probably the fastest typist in Monterey. I can now hear this. This is ding, ding.
I was able to interview Nancy Costello, who actually signed the petition, and was actually an organizer of that group. And she told me that with this outrage and shock, they wanted to mobilize and to respond as an interracial community to this racism from Salinas.
What I love about this petition is I imagine someone got it and was like, oh, I'm going to take this to my coworkers or my neighbor and ask them to sign it. We tell them the same thing today. Start with the people in your circle, share your petition, with your Facebook friends, or send it to your closest email contacts, or find your family and, make sure that they sign it. And really build that sort of like natural grassroots response to your campaign. And once you start that, that's when you build the foundation for something to get louder and larger in your own community, in your own state, and even in your own country.
What they decided to do was create team leaders to hand out the petitions. If you look on the top of the petitions, you can see who actually carried them around, and they came from different quarters in the community. Nancy took one, Toni Ricketts took one.
I think they just went down the street, and whoever they ran across in the neighborhood, I stood in the corner and said, hey, can you sign this petition?
Toni Ricketts, of course, she takes that to her friends.
And I can look at the one, for example, that was signed by Ed Ricketts and John Steinbeck. I can look at that, and I can tell exactly where they were.
So everyone around there, everyone loved the people, and they were shipped out, by the way. A great big family of Japanese. Maya Miyamoto, I used to go to school with him. It was a dirty trick. So, of course, my dad was angry. He could sign a thing like that right away.
I suspect that it was Toni Ricketts who took the petition and brought it to Robinson and Una Jeffers in Carmel, and also the Weston clan. They were all part of the artist colony down there at the time, because she was writing for a literary magazine at the time that a lot of the Carmel artisans were writing in and contributing artwork to.
Jeffers was a very important poet to my dad. Very, very important. I don't think they knew each other.
You know, they were both people of great compassion, so it's not surprising that they signed the letter, but at the same time, it is surprising. So it's one of those kind of enigmas. And when I think of Jeffers, you know, I've been thinking about it, and the only thing that comes to mind is a line from his poem, The Answer, where he says, "To maintain one's integrity, be merciful and uncorrupted, and not wish for evil." And if that's the way he understood integrity, then the signing of this document certainly fits in and explains it, I think.
Read that petition carefully, because to me, it's a wonderful testimony to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. It doesn't say, we believe the camps were a mistake, or da, 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 da. That's not what it says. It says, we join the Department of Defense in welcoming back.
The War Department believes that the people of the Pacific Coast area will accord returning persons of Japanese ancestry all the considerations to which they are entitled.
It hitches their wagon to the government, which is very smart. And I think at the time, I don't see any other way they could have done it. The war's not over when this petition is going around.
Take California, South America, Brooklyn, Europe, take whole world.
The government is continuing to keep connected. All of the caricatures of the Japanese military that you see in the press and the posters and everything. You want people to subscribe to war bonds. You want people to continue to volunteer to go in the Army. We got some really serious stuff going on in the Pacific. Bloody, messy, awful stuff. We got Iwo Jima, Okinawa. People's kids are being shipped home, dead, right, from the Pacific. But it isn't easy. I can't imagine going door to door in Salinas trying to convince the good people of Salinas that their son was just killed in the Philippines by Japanese people who had nothing to do with the strawberry grower.
I think they were afraid. I think they were afraid of what would happen, how they would be treated by their neighbors, by the people they work with. I think there was a lot of fear about it. Fear of retaliation, fear of, you know, why are you supporting, you know, these Japanese folks who are coming back, and, you know, they were our enemies. I'm sure they got a lot of doors slammed in their face.
I'm not signing nothing for no dirty Jap. Go to hell!
For me, that makes it even braver for these folks who did sign these petitions.
Yeah, I think that they had both compassion and courage to do this, because I'm sure they had friends that were really against it.
Wouldn't it be nice if you could talk to all the people who signed? You know, why? Why'd you do this? You know, what gave you the courage to do this? And then what we do is we bottle that and we spread it around the country.
Because it doesn't come naturally. It really is one of those things where it takes some care and it takes some thought, and when you get it right, you create magic.
All right, I suspect that each one of these persons had a good reason for wanting to sign this. Their head was in the right place, I think.
I think the reason so many people signed it is that the Japanese were very much integrated into the community.
I've been to Manzanar, and that's a dreadful place. I think my dad signed it because he really honestly believed very strongly that what had happened was wrong. Going back to his childhood when he experienced prejudice himself, he really felt that there had been an injustice done. I think it had a very strong impact on him.
Oh, there it is. My father was a first-generation Sicilian. He had polio when he was very young. He managed beautifully. He became an attorney. No matter how terrible a person was that he was dealing with, he could always find something positive or good about them.
Yeah, I recognize the signature. He loved people, and I think that
His feeling was probably, well, we were at war with the country of Japan, but that doesn't mean we were at war with all Japanese people.
We know there were maybe 15 or 16 of these petitions that were passed all around the whole entire Monterey Peninsula, gathering signatures not just from famous people, but from all the local, anybody who would sign these petitions. And that resulted in an ad that appeared in the Herald in May of 1945. This is the only place on the West Coast where this happened.
We, the undersigned, then believe it is the privilege and responsibility of this community to cooperate with the national government by ensuring the democratic way of life to all members of the community.
And the newspaper was very influential on anything that was in this area. Everybody read the Herald.
And what's great about those petitions, too, is they went to the Monterey Herald, because the Monterey Herald published all the names. And if you look at the petitions, all the names have checks on them. So we think the Herald went through them and checked it when they put the name down. People didn't put their lives so much in jeopardy when they signed a petition, I don't think, but they certainly put their professional lives in jeopardy. A young woman contacted me. She said she recognized her mother's signature on there. And she told me her mother was about 18 at the time and was working at the Hovden sardine cannery, or the Monterey Aquarium is today. She's an Italian woman. Her name was DiMaggio.
She was very strong in her own opinion. Didn't really brag about signing that because she needed the money to go help the family.
And I was just blown away by that. The fact that she signed this. Newt Hovden was to put it, a good way to say it, he was sort of a racist gentleman. And so it took a lot of guts on her end to sign this and keep her job down there.
Oh, I think if Mr. Hovden had found out she signed the petition and he had a sign saying only white people touched your fish, she would have been fired.
What makes a person sign a petition? Sometimes that requires a real act of courage, like in the case of Mary DiMaggio, but it requires an act of stepping forward. And you step forward because you're emotionally convinced, of the stakes of the petition, and you believe that if enough people sign, it can make a difference. Once you get people to think on those two things, if they're a yes on both of those, they're going to sign your petition.
The people who signed the petition were probably thoughtful people, caring people, and 3 of my family's names were on that. My father, my mother, and my uncle.
Oh, yeah, that's my mother's signature. The reason she signed it was our close relationship with the Kadani family. He was not a cold-hearted banker. He was very cautious about what he signed his name to. He knew a lot of Japanese people, and a lot of the Japanese worked for Anita Dowd, and he had a close friendship relationship with Anita Dowd.
When I was a senior in high school, they still required you to memorize the preamble. And my father would sit with me while I was memorizing it. He said to me, "Now you know the words that make this country so great." That was my dad.
My mother was Democrat. She had been a social worker before she married, had worked with the migrant laborers in Salinas. My father was fairly conservative. He was a Republican. He'd lost his sight when he was at Stanford Law School, but I had never seen him as an activist.
My father, he has a character in the Pipe Dreams based on Cannery Row. But here on chapter 37, it opens up, Dr. Horace Dormady hated night calls.
It brings them back, right back into the room. Marie grew up in San Francisco, was a debutante, and then did the big reverse and became a bohemian, which happened in those days.
Those 500 people that signed this back in the 1940s certainly wouldn't have known that 80 years from now, it might be a teaching tool to show other students, communities, the leaders on how to construct a petition and make a difference. And that is so powerful. When I think about the people who will read this and start their own petition, the things that they will change in their own cities or states or countries it's almost unfathomable, right? It could be anything.
I didn't know at the time, but he was very special. He understood. He didn't take me out and play catch with me, for instance, and we go fishing. It was always talking, and always talking at the lab.
It's more about being deeply moved. It takes courage to take a risk because you're going against the grain for what is right. That's much more than being proud. See, she fundamentally was a humanist, believing we're fundamentally good, and there's other stuff that gets in the way. I remember once, I think there was somebody murdered somebody or something, and it was in the paper. And I asked her, Mom, why do people do something like that? How, you know, thinking they're evil, they're bad, they're horrible. And she said, oh, no, it's that horrible things must have happened to them.
A lobbyist with $1 million might get you some doors opened in, various businesses or in the halls of Congress, but 1 million signatures are going to give you 1 million people who will take deeper action on your petition. And it's natural, it's authentic, right? Those people signing aren't being paid to sign, they're doing it because they believe in it, and you cannot put a price tag on that.
I think the petition really was wonderful support for all of us who went through what we had to do during the war. I think we appreciated that.
We were sure happy to see the welcoming back ad. That was a message really saying, we welcome you back. Feel safe as long as we are here.
And my mom said that she kept that petition. It was in the Herald, right? So it meant a great deal to her.
Oh, I was very grateful. In fact, we got together and put an ad in the paper thanking them for all they had done for us, you know.
It was kind of a hard time to get back to normal life again after spending 3 years in a camp like that.
There were anti-Japanese groups. Many of them worked very hard to say, don't come back. We don't want Japs back in our community.
There's always people that hate people, you know? Yeah.
Approximately 30 cases of violence directed against Japanese living in California. So you can imagine as these stories start buzzing around the camps, parents are going to say, do I want to go back? Do I really feel safe and secure? Will I have a job? Will our home be there?
The personal loss that people suffered, the family losses.
The economy really is affected by these concentration camps because, number one, that they had to sell all their businesses pretty much for pennies on the dollar, or if they were lucky, someone would maintain it for them. As California, for example, prior to World War II, there were literally hundreds of Japanese fishing boats. After World War II, you can count on one hand how many own fishing boats.
Economic greed is such an important factor in determining, shaping human behavior. Approximately 70% of the people who were forcibly removed, 70% of that, 120,000, came back to the West Coast eventually. Farmland, real property, and business property. $3 billion. That's what they lost. Dad was a junior partner and worth about $235,000 in 1942 dollars. And they got $15,000 back.
And of course, the people who run this country needs to understand what causes things like that to happen, you know, and we were one of the victims of what happened during World War II. We were there for 3 years.
He was the man of few words. He didn't say much, but, you know, he was in the 442. There was a lot. I mean, he didn't talk about what happened at all, really, to us. Very little. I think he just put that way in a little box for 50 years, you know.
Many Issei Nisei parents did not talk about camp life with their kids. You know, kids are pretty smart. They pick up on cues. And I could see the almost, it's like life energy being sapped out of them.
All this history has passed, and we're still wrestling with some of the same exact issues.
When people don't believe in facts or science anymore, and demagoguery takes over, a lot of the civil liberties we take for granted will go down the drain. That was true then, and regrettably, that is true now.
You're asking me if there could be another internment of a racial or ethnic group in this country. First of all, it takes place today. Native American Indian reservations is a form of that.
I fear it could happen very easily, the way things are now. It could sneak up on us.
Can history repeat itself today with this kind of incarceration? Yeah, it's happening today, yeah. So many Asian American communities are the target of violence, of hate, of derogatory language. But there is also a pathway to address them. And I'm thrilled that petitions can play a part in that because you see real tangible change come from them.
I think it was unfair, but the good thing is I met my husband there. Otherwise, I never would have met him, get married to him.
Yeah, I always ask my dad why he named it owl. He says, I don't know. And I look at the building, he's got 2 owls up there on the building, and the guy that's got it now, he's still using owl.
I mean, and it's frightening when you think about that. It's frightening to me that it could happen again today. I like to think it couldn't.
Well, I think we can work to prevent this from happening again by educating people.
Make people aware of what happened in the past so that hopefully we can avoid having it happen again in the future.
The petition to me is the very first part of that, but it's the most important because if you can get someone to add your name to an online petition today, that's the way to engage them in deeper action, whether it's, going to meet with their legislators, getting out in the streets for a march, going to a company's headquarters and delivering their petition. It's just like, it's the entry point and it's fueled by compassion.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, this country is resilient, and as bad as we think things are today, we're going to overcome it. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Depression, and we're still here.
The Constitution is always interpreted, and it's interpreted by power. It's an ongoing discussion that we'll have to have continually.
And this month alone have seen countless petitions asking for, communities to take violence toward Asian Americans more seriously, or for schools to address it with curriculum, or for media outlets to write about the stories of Asian Americans who've experienced hate crimes.
Americans, as good as they are, good comparatively, if they could somehow have more faith in the ability to think for themselves. Think for yourself.
Enculturated history is learned, parent to child. But we teach them hate. We teach them kindness. Do whatever you can that you consider best for your children.
We could support acts that give people rights instead of focusing on acts that take rights away from people. we can give more to the people and expand their opportunities in all manners, instead of just confining them simply out of plain fear or unbased ignorance.
Japanese American internment has been swept under the rug of American history ever since it happened. This sort of homogenized notion of American history, where we're this big melting pot who all come together, is the big myth. And it's only when we demand that this history get placed in curricula, get placed before young children growing up in our country, that they know about it. And if they don't know about it, then they can't understand how it could happen again.
Government by ensuring the democratic way of life to all members of the community.
I think petitions are a real lesson in social history and cultural history, in civil rights history.
This is a national story because it shows us the light. That's what this shows us. It shows us the better part of us, not the bad, dark, ugly part of us. And America is encompassed by both.
Saying something is the absolute best thing that we can do anytime something like this happens. That's the model. That's the way people are supposed to behave. It gave that wonderful group of people a wherewithal to say the right thing. Just say the right thing and say it over and over.
The past is prologue. So what do the petitions mean? It is past history, an event that happened with a ton of significance attached to it, which will carry on as prologue for the future and carry a legacy and a story for all future generations.
In order of sitting here, we have Tim Thomas, historian, Jeff Uchida from the Monterey Peninsula Unified School Districts, and Larry Oda, who is the president of the, is that right, president? Is that right?
The
of
National
JACL. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for coming and watching our what would you call it, the fruits of our labor. At the very end, you saw that the film was copyrighted by Carolyn McCombs. And Carolyn's in the audience here, so I want to raise your hand, Carolyn. She's the chair of our Heritage Committee and put this together with Tim Thomas. I was going to go someplace else with that, but you know, please bear with me. I didn't go to a concert. Have you heard of the K-pop group BTS? You have? Larry's a big fan, but he won't admit it, so I'm sorry. My wife is completely off the point. But my wife went to the concert in Stanford. She enjoyed it so much, well, actually, her sister bought her tickets down to, so we went to Las Vegas. And the concert was Thursday night. I got back here at 10 a.m. this morning because this was so important. I, had to bail out so I could come and see all of you. I guess what I wanted to say was that how many of you went to our the screening and our talk at the Seaside Library? A few of you. So this one was supposed to be kind of the history of the Monterey Japanese prior or subsequent to World War II, and the film is a key part of that. What I wanted to bring up before we start talking about our history after the war was that this is the Monterey Peninsula was pretty much the beginning of the immigration of Japanese to the United States. Back in the late 1800s, Tim Thomas talked about how a labor contractor up in the trees cutting branches, clearing land for the railroad, noticed the abundance of abalone and salmon in the bay and wrote back to Japan and said, there's no one doing anything with it. And that was the beginning. The first Japanese fishing village was down on Cannery Row, in between El Torito and, which is now El Torito, and Chart House Restaurant. That was started around 1906, and when now you may not remember that in the film there was a big panoramic picture of Monterey Bay, and there were a number of fishing boats. And Tim talked about it. There were 185 boats that fished for salmon in Monterey Bay. 145 of them were Japanese boats. 70%, over 70%. And the Japanese were dominant in the fishing industry prior to the Sicilians coming. And the fish that was most plentiful were salmon. And sardines came, I don't know, 1920-ish, I think. Well, heavily after 1915. Heavily after 1915. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Japanese was dominant in the fishing industry. All the businesses on Fisherman's Wharf were Japanese. 70%. So all that was lost during World War II. Coming back from the concentration camps, you know, the fishermen lost their boats, and the businesses on Fishermen's Wharf were taken over by others. So today, people think that the Sicilians, the Italians, were the ones that started the fishing industry in Monterey, and that's not true. And it's one of the reasons we started our museum in our building down on Adams Street, the JACL Hall. There was a picture of it in the movie. So we have some flyers that on the table by the refreshments. When you pick up your cookies, pick up a flyer and come see us.
Larry won't admit it, but he is a big fan, I think, of BTS. But he doesn't want to admit that he was probably in there dancing with them. But thank you for coming, and thank you to Marina, Friends of Marina Library, and to the group here. It's always great to see new faces coming out and hearing this story. And that's one of the things I think that drove me personally, being a teacher, is that how little is talked about, you know, this part of our history. And it's a very sad part of our history, but it's there. And now the relevance of how it relates to today. And that's really, especially for young people. But if you look in our schools, you know, literally it talks about the Japanese, this situation, just a few paragraphs in our book. And when you really think about how wrong it was, I mean, to me, that's the bottom line. But young people today, you know, they're very attuned to those kind of things. So hopefully, you know, with things like this, they see. When we first started this project, the whole thing with our museum, you know, it was literally, we were so fortunate to have Tim. Tim Thomas, his professionalism has brought our museum to just another level. Originally, it was going to be a bunch of teachers, and it would look like, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it would have been just, you know, their classroom walls with poster boards. But Tim has brought, you know, a true museum to what it is, and we are very, extremely proud of this. And then with this film, you know, it's now won a few awards. It's on PBS, seen throughout the country. So even though I originally thought it was just, you know, it's more of a Monterey story, it's not. There are so many implications to the big picture. And I think it's referenced a couple times in the film. You know, it especially talks about families in the bravery it took to step forward to sign these things. It wouldn't have been popular, but yet they stepped forward. And hopefully our young people today see those kind of things. And you as parents, grandparents, friends, family, we need to push our schools. But hopefully, see, the part is, I'm kind of connected to the schools now, but what we want to hopefully this does is provides resources to the teacher. And so a classroom then can get it more into the depth of a subject. You know, what's there in the text, even though today they probably don't even read a book like we used to, but materials that will enhance the experience and at least an understanding of how things like that, even though they're 70 years ago, they still relate to today and the importance of how things, you know. And I remember as a kid, my parents never talked about it. I would go at the dinner table and talk to my mom and dad, and, you know, dumb me, a 16, 17-year-old kid, and I tell my parents, I wouldn't have gone. Yeah, easy for me to say in 1970. But you know, when you know, there are people with guns pointed at you, the police, the FBI, all these people are you know, you have no choice. But I'll give you a little side story of my family. So my family, My grandfather and my great uncle were in San Francisco in 1906 when the earthquake hit. So everything was destroyed and all the fires and everything. So they came down to the Peninsula. My great uncle opened a dry goods store in Monterey, and I think he was a labor contractor, and he would find Japanese men to go cut trees down in Pebble Beach. My grandfather opened a dry cleaners in Pacific Grove, and we had our business literally up to 100 years in our family. And I was kind of proud of saying that we, lasted for 100 years, even though at the end it was barely a business, but it was still there. But my family was extremely fortunate. Well, let me back up a little bit. So when the war broke out, there was about 5 or 6 families locally on the peninsula. And I think they thought that they could get away from going to the concentration camps by moving inland. So my family heard of a farmer in the valley, in Reedley, California. And so these 5 or 6 families, the Miyamotos were one, and my family and a couple others thought that they could live there to escape from having to go there. But, a few weeks or months later, they extended the ban, to include the entire, state of California, right? So eventually they had to go on. But we were also, my family was extremely lucky, and I never got to ask these questions to my parents or my grandparents. But in Pacific Grove, where our business was, we were on Grand Avenue in downtown Pacific Grove, and there are 2 dry cleaners right next to each other. And when the war broke out, the cleaners above us, it was called Milton Cleaners. My family's business was Pacific Grove Cleaners, but Milton Cleaners during the war ran our cleaners. So when the war was over, when we came back, my family came back, we had a business to come back to. So fortunate. You hear of many that lost everything. Dr. Yamada talked about losing everything. My family was extremely fortunate to have a business to come back to. So I'll turn it over. Yes, sir.
Jeff, thank you so much. I'd like to follow up on your point. It's a wonderful movie and a wonderful, truly amazing research. And Tim Thomas, thank you so much for opening the door and realizing what you found. It's truly a treasure. In your research, did you find other families that helped preserve the businesses of the local Japanese? For example, in the Salinas Valley, the Bunn family preserved the Yuki farms throughout the war, and they were able to return to their farms. And they still have a relationship. Did you find that?
What I did find, Monterey in particular, is that, as we all know, a lot of Japanese lost their fishing boats. Most people don't remember or get it, they also lost their fishing licenses. That was a really big deal. Commercial fishing license was very expensive. And so, as I mentioned in the film, there were hundreds of Japanese fishermen that owned their own boats before the war, only a handful after the war. One of them was a guy named Frank Monaco, who was a Monterey fisherman. And Frank Monaco was able to do that because in 1938, he had a wooden boat called the Ohio No. 3. And he had that boat for about 10 years. And that's about as long as they lasted. He had to get a new boat. And he leased a boat for the 1938-39 sardine season. He contracted to fish for the Del Mar Cannery. And before he could take possession of that boat, it caught on fire, which actually wasn't unusual. That kind of thing happened. So he had to hustle, and he finds a boat in Southern California. And he brings his crew down about a week before the season started, got that boat, brought it back to Monterey. They fished the sardines opening night of the 38-39 season. And before he could unload his fish, his good friends, the men he grew up with, and then he went to play baseball with and went to school with, the Monterey Fishermen Union came up to him and said, "You can't unload your fish because you brought an outside boat into Monterey." And keep in mind, there was a lot of fear of the Japanese military at this point, and the Japanese, and that's where that was coming from. And I interviewed Frank about this, and he told me, I remember from my social studies class at Monterey High School, I think that was illegal. And he went around Monterey and couldn't find an attorney to take his case. Finally found one in San Francisco. Of course, the war broke out. Frank was too old to join the Army. That was his plan. He wanted to join the Army, but they wouldn't let him. And then there was a little window where the government gave Japanese folks opportunities. And you could either move east or you could go into camp. And Frank chose to go east. Ended up in Idaho, where the only jobs he could find was that of a carpenter. And there were other Japanese men there as well. And they all wanted to join that carpenters union because that's how they could get work. And they said no. That union said, you can't join the union. Again, Frank says, I think that was illegal. And so he writes a letter to Harold Ickes, who was then the Secretary of Labor, who sent an emissary out from Washington, D.C. to Idaho and said, you got to let these gentlemen be in your union. And so he helped create that. The point is that Frank's lawsuit for the boat went to the courts. He won that lawsuit. And because of that, he was able to buy another boat and continue to fish. But really, to your point, is when a lot of other Japanese fishermen who returned to Monterey, they didn't have their boats, but a number of the Sicilian fishermen were walking onto their boats to fish with them. Again, Monterey is one place where I saw that happening. And there was a lot of work in the canneries as well, so they could work in the canneries as well. And one thing I want to point out to you, just before I forget it, is the little film you see in the film called the Candid Camera. That's the film that we found in the hall as well. And we show that in our museum. It's not 12 minutes long. And I just recently found out how important that film really is. And what I learned from a professor at the Eastern University in Boston who researched this thing, she told me that in the 30s and 40s there were a number of Japanese American camera clubs that were producing these kinds of films. And she thinks ours is the only one left. And so it really stunned me when I heard that. So I'm really proud that we have it here, and again, we show it quite often.
I'm just so impressed with the way that this film helps our students and ourselves learn more about what it means to live in a democracy, how our relationships with our neighbors impact how we think about the world and how we make personal, impactful decisions. And I just, really resonated with the need for our students to understand what it means to be a citizen in a democracy these days. And I just wanted to learn a little bit more about ways in which this film could be a tool for students in high school and middle school. Are there plans at work to develop lesson plans that could help showcase some of the themes of this film?
Carolyn answer that question.
I work with an organization that is working with Monterey Peninsula Unified, but I don't know how that's cascading down to individual teachers and how we can put tools in their hands to have these discussions with students.
We can hand it to Carolyn.
Let Carolyn answer that question.
Thank you for asking that question. This 30-minute film has been edited from the original 60-minute film, and it was designed for the classroom. In addition to the film, we have developed an educator's guide that walks teachers probably from 11th grade on, but it can be used as little as elementary school, because we do have a children's bibliography that talks about stories that third graders can hear to learn about the internment. So we have done presentations for high school and middle school students just recently. We've done one with Hardin Middle School and with Stevenson High School. So we're hoping that we can get into other schools and talk to more students.
And thank you. And as a librarian, just because I can't resist, I'll just jump in to let you know that the JACL has donated both the educational version and this DVD that you watched tonight to the Monterey County 3 libraries. So we have a couple collections, a couple copies in the system. So if you want to check it out, just go up to the circulation desk, place a hold, and the next copy will be coming to you. And also, it is something that you can view on, I think, pbs.org. So and this was the 64-minute one for those who are wondering.
What are the copyright rules? If someone were to check it out from the library, could they show it to a group of students?
I would recommend reaching out to the JACL, but I see nodding here. I imagine if you reach out to the Monterey chapter of the JACL, they own the rights to the film. So
I just wanted to say one thing. I don't know how important it is, but I'm 8th generation born here, also local Native American as well. And I just wanted to let you know that my grandmother, who was born here in the 1890s, told me these stories, especially about the one with you and the laundry in City Grove, and how some of the places were maintained by some of their friends that nobody really talked that much about on the peninsula, so that when some of them did come back, they were able to come back to their places and rejoin the community and open up their businesses. So I just wanted to let you know that. I, as a child, learned that through my grandmother and my mother.
Thank you for that. I think that Jeff knows about his family's. Now, George Kodama, who was in the film, talks about his family's cleaners, the owl cleaners, and his family's cleaners were maintained by their neighbors also. I'm hesitant to tell you about the rest of the story. But, the property was taken care of, but as payment, the person that took care of it took part of their property. So it goes both ways. There are farms that were taken over by either neighboring farms or someone else. There was a gentleman in San Jose that took care of properties, and he had to carry a gun because to keep vandals away. More locally, I guess, maybe not locally, but a friend of mine who worked in the recorder's office in Salinas told me that he was researching property transfers, and when he got to the 40s, he noticed that when the Japanese were taken away, that there were 2 packing houses that bought up the foreclosed properties. And what was remarkable to him was that after the war in 1946, one of the packing houses sold the properties back to the original owners. The other packing house didn't. So it shows you that there are both sides to the story all over, throughout the
A little bit of
community.
maintenance, between that. Yeah. My grandmother said that there was somebody in Oak Grove too. I can't remember the name of the company, but she had a list of the names of some of the companies at the time. But we're talking a long time ago, so. Yeah, it's all very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm still having a hard time understanding or grasping this, what you just talked about, losing their land. I mean, there were deeds and titles still in effect in those days, and there were laws enforcing them, I assume. If you owned a property and didn't have a mortgage on it, I could see if you owned a mortgage, then it get foreclosed. But if you own the business itself, I don't understand how they just took it from you, okay?
Right. This was a mortgage. How do you lose your land? If you're paying for it and you can't make the payments, what happens? And that's what happened. You know, I don't know how much a farm costs.
But if you owned it free and clear.
Yeah. If you owned it free and clear, and there were a couple, I don't know how many, well, I know that who was it, the Yuki family?
Yeah, Yuki family.
That, you know, I think they owned it, they must have owned their land free and clear. We have tons of stories. One of the descendants of the Yuki family donated his grandfather's business sign that we display in our museum. The Yamate Oriental Arts. Big engraved sign, I don't know, so like 10 feet across. Very beautiful. So when he donated the sign to us, he said, yeah, you know, I had this whale wash up on my beach. He lives up near Atascadero, north of Santa Cruz. How many of you own a beach that can hold a whale?
So it's a heartening story to hear about the petition and people being welcomed back. I'm really, and there was kind of an explanation that this is because it was a tight-knit community, that people went to school together, people worked together, they were in the same union, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm kind of curious about whether there's any information about how people responded when the Japanese Americans were being rounded up. Was there any backlash from the community? This shouldn't be happening. These are friends and neighbors. They're not spies. They've lived here. You know, was there any evidence that people put up a fuss before it happened as opposed to afterwards?
Larry might be a bit, he's older than I am. I refer back to his personal knowledge.
There was, but yeah, there have been documentaries about the protests, but I don't know. I think that for the most part, people just said, "Oh well, that's the way it goes." You know, yeah.
I think too, though, the hysteria of the unknown. You know, the war. So I hear your point, but part of it is also at the beginning when Pearl Harbor was bombed and the hysteria. It was scary. I'm sure it was. And then 9066 comes around and people have to be sent to prison basically for 4 years. At the end of that, that's when I think, you know, it was pretty close, I think, to the conclusion of the war that this petition went out. And you got to remember, to me, this is my personal opinion, most of the originators, a lot of these were bohemian thinkers, and you know, they were, you know, Carmel. I don't want to put a slam on Carmel people, but you know, they were people who were, you know, were thinkers, the bohemians that you know, used logic and, you know, saw through the craziness. So, and then you hear the personal stories, and that's, I think, what makes it a human story for everyone. When they talk about their friends and their families, and you know, picking strawberries and getting the best strawberries they tasted, and things like that, and that's what, you know, made this just a story. And then you see the Sumida daughter talking about her parents, and it shows you a small world. Mr. and Mrs. Sumida, they used to have a nursery behind Stahl Motors in Monterey, and they had apartments back there, and I rented from them, and I used to always bump into Mr. Sumida, and we'd talk, and he was very jovial. He never talked about the war. But, you know, here's a man who was in the 442nd, which to me, you know, and it shows you that generation, you know, they are part of the greatest generation. He never talked about it. You know, he was a war hero. He was part of a group that still to this day, you know, holds, you know, the distinction of that. But what I think this also shows is that, and Tim alludes to it all the time, is this place was special. So I think my community, my family and stuff, we were very fortunate to have people. But it goes to show you though that, with the hysteria of war and the uncertainty and stuff, and we have to think back, we're now in this age where the internet and information comes like this, and some of it's wrong, but it's fast, right? Gotta remember, 1943 or 44, it took a long time. So there was talk in the film where they hear about this petition or about these feelings while they were in camp. It probably took weeks for it to get to camp from where it originally came about, and how, and then how details and things as it travels. But I'm sure when people were in camp, many were fearful of going, one of the things, they talk about it, the camps were there for their own protection, even though the guns were not pointed out, they were pointed in. Some of that was true, but yet, the whole idea of how long information takes, and even, I could imagine being in camp and you're hearing, wow, back in where I came from, they may not want us back, and it's scary, and people are getting hurt, and people are, threatening and stuff like that. So, but that goes to show you the power of these kind of things. But it also shows you the compassion of humans, especially people who are thinking, how wrong it was. And that's what used to always get to me, to my parents. So, you were born here, you're citizens. But, my mom and dad would, they would know, it's Jeffrey. No, Jeffrey, you would have gone. And I wouldn't have gone. They would have had to, yeah, they probably would have, right? They would have thrown me in the back of the bus and threw away the key.
But then if you had to go serve in the military and die potentially for your country, I think the argument that was made by the petitioners was superb. You're asking folks to sacrifice for their country, and yet you're going to deny them, I'm not naive. Yes, they were denying them their citizenship rights, but you're also going to turn around and ask me to fight for this country. So, am I in or am I out? And
I'm sure that was a difficult, but it shows you the loyalty to those men. I'm sure there are men and women that they put away that and fought for the Constitution.
So I want to pivot a little bit here to, you're talking about citizenship. Birthright citizenship has come up. The president wants to do away with that. So the JACL is filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court to protest that. And it's interesting, there were 70 amici filed against that, the birthright citizenship ban. And the number one, I think it was the only one that was considered by not considered, but was discussed by the Supreme Court was the JACL one. So, between the birthright citizenship and the Alien Enemy Act. Now, there were about 3,500, I think, Japanese that were detained under the Alien Enemy Act during World War II. You probably heard about the 10 War Relocation Authority camps. There were 17 other Justice Department Army camps that held enemy aliens. My father was one of them. He was picked up, Jeff's family moved to Reedley. my family, the Okas, you saw Kaz Oka in our little film that was part of the documentary. His family and the Okamuras, who was a fishing captain. They're friends, all those families are friends. They moved to a farm in Clovis, which was east of Highway 99. Highway 99 was the limit of the exclusion zone. In July, I think it was July, when the exclusion zone was expanded to the whole state of California, the very next day my dad was picked up and taken to the Fresno County Jail, to Sharp Park, I forget what they call it, immigration camp, to Angel Island, and then to Lordsburg, New Mexico. The JACL was also filing a suit, or filing an amicus to protest the implementation of the Enemy Alien Act to target, I forget what his name is, Diego. Yeah, and he was picked up as a Venezuelan, as an enemy alien, and deported. And the Enemy Alien Act is meant to detain enemy combatants. If we are at war with a country, they are an enemy, and their citizens are in this country, they are an enemy alien. Well, Garcia was not. Oh, well, we're not at war with. Well, we weren't then with Venezuela, but anyway, there's so many things going on that are topical to what happened to us then. And since we, as Japanese, were affected by that, we have some credibility in talking about it and disputing, the implications of the administration. So those are the kind of things that we also try to bring out in our documentary, that there are other applications of what happened to us and the lessons that we could learn today.
I just wanted to touch on why didn't people speak up beforehand, and I think what I got from the film is they had 5 days to leave. That's a blink of an eye before anybody realizes anything goes on. But I think this story is so personal for you guys to be talking about, or the interviews of people that lived it or their parents lived it. The Monakas, I had a friend that was one of their kids, so I knew Royal and Hiro Monako, and I remember them talking about him being in 442nd and her being in an internment camp, which is very realistic. But also about the fear beforehand. I had a boss decades ago, Tadano, they grew up in the Phoenix area, and he talked about his father being shot at when he's out, he was grew strawberries or something, out in the fields and having to lie down in the furrows of the field to keep from getting shot. So there's a lot of fear, obviously, on both sides, but the hysteria just ruled at that point in time after Pearl Harbor.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for our speakers. Thanks again to the JACL. Thanks to the Friends of the Marina Library for hosting this. And thanks to all of you for coming out. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And I hope we can also take a little bit of that, they say those who do not learn their history are doomed to repeat it. But I hope we can also take the positive lesson that we get from this film about the Monterey petition, that we have some capacity to act and to make a difference as well. I think that's a really amazing part of this film that you've made. So thank you very much. On a lighter note, there are